The vector is clear: transparent pricing, border-busting competition, and plan designs that finally put members, your welders, your teachers, your accountants, your mining operators, at the center of the cost equation.
Hey everyone, Rodney Jr. here at the mic, and today's episode is a true family deep dive. My pop, Rodney Sr., aka Triforta's resident healthcare mudbogger, just watched the White House lob an executive order grenade into the pharmacy's marketplace. So we hit record and broke it all down. Most favored nation pricing, what it really means, what it doesn't, and why Ozempic is $88 in London, but four figures here in Nevada. PBMs, the black box toll booths of RX spend, pop names the three reforms that could smash the rebate shell game for good, global drug sourcing, how a Humira pen can legally cross the border for 70% less once Congress snips the red tape, rural hospital reality checks, why price caps on Medicare sound noble but can shutter the last ER within 100 miles of a mine site, quick strike moves from the Triforta Benefits Playbook, Tier 0 copays, international pipelines, and manufacturer assistance, tools you can deploy before your next renewal. By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with a punch list of any CFO or HR leader can action in 45 days, and a sneak peek at the policy shakeups we expect over the next 36 months. Grab the show notes for the timestamps, playbook download links, and that 15-minute sandbox call with our benefits engineering team. Strap in, change is barreling down the haul road, and we're riding shotgun. Let's get into it.
Hey, Rodney Sr. here. I see a lot of different opinions on this, and this isn't going to play out the way many people think it is. I'm going to share my thoughts on the President's executive order.
Awesome. So before we dive in, can you briefly explain what most favored nations status actually means for prescription drugs?
Yeah, all right, friends. So let's zero in on the headline that has every benefits manager texting us recently. You know, that executive order President Trump had signed recently that grants the United States what's known as the most favored nation status on prescription drugs. So, if you've been riding shotgun with us on earlier episodes, you know the drill. American employers bankroll the most expensive pharmacy market on the planet. And at Triforta, we track RX invoices every single day. And the number still makes our jaw drop. The executive order is really aimed to blow up that imbalance by pegging our drug prices to the lowest rates charged in those peer nations around the world. So if you need a vivid illustration, Trump loves telling that Ozempic story where his billionaire buddy snagged a month's supply of Ozempic for about $88 in London. Yet that identical pen costs north of $1,000 here in Reno, Nevada, on the pharmacy shelf. So same molecules, same manufacturer, and 12 times the markup. So think about what that means for your plan. When your self-funded trust buys a specialty med at U.S. list price, you're effectively paying to subsidize discounts for the rest of the world. So how is that remotely fair or equitable? So why do we allow drugs your employees depend on, to cost 10, sometimes 20 times more here than abroad? So, spoiler alert, it's not fair, and this order is Washington's opening shot at leveling the playing field.
So, Dad, you've poured over claim files for our mining clients and industry suppliers. So spell it out for those CFOs listening. When Ozempic costs $88 in London but $1,000 here in Reno, how does that delta flow straight into their stop loss premiums and renewal hikes? In other words, why should an employer lose sleep over these global price gaps?
Let's carve this turkey into three clean slices so every employer in our audience can taste what's coming. So what the executive order really says, and more importantly, what it doesn't say, is how that ripple hits your plan and your people, from stop loss premiums to the members out of pocket. So what a price level playing field means for the broader U.S. economy, because when Main Street businesses move more cash, they hire, they innovate, and everybody wins. So, quick disclaimer before I rattle predictions that might ruffle feathers. I've been hammering the healthcare status quo for years. The cartel of carriers, PBMs, and big pharma is riddled with conflicts of interest. And the game is tilted against employers and their workers. And we at Triforta, we refuse to play by those old rules. And change, ready or not, it's barreling down the track.
Right. And so, Dad, our listeners, they include a lot of Nevada mine operators, the supplier businesses that serve them, and rural hospital board members who keep hearing price controls tossed around in DC debates. Can you drop a real world example, say how Medicare rate caps nearly bankrupted a critical access hospital in Nevada, to show why government set prices so often backfire in healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's call it like it is. Most favored nation status may sound diplomatic, but at the end of the day, it's a price cap. And price caps have left a string of casualties across American healthcare. First, let's talk about a ground level story. Picture a doctor. He's a sole family practice covering a 60-mile slice of Nevada's mining corridor. And the doctors, all-in costs to keep their clinic running, staff salaries, malpractice insurance, licenses, rent, medical supplies, that hovers around $90 per visit. Now enter Washington. Hey, sorry, doc, we're capping your reimbursement at $50. That's a $40 loss every time she says open wide. So how long before the doctor closes shop and miners have to drive clear to Reno for primary care? We watched a similar domino fall at a critical access hospital in rural Nevada when Medicare froze its outpatient rates. Local jobs started to dry up, and the community's ER wait times tripled overnight. Not to mention the lack of primary care providers being available in the area. Now zoom out to big pharma. It's true, list prices can be outrageous, but some of that is opportunistic. But the eye-popping sticker is the summit of a very tall mountain. Research and development. Out of roughly 10,000 compounds screened, maybe one turns into a marketable drug. The other 999 dead ends still show up on their ledger. They had costs and expenses for that research. So the regulatory gauntlet, phase 1 through phase 3 trials eat 8 to 12 years and hundreds of millions in compliance spend before a single prescription is written. Then there's manufacturing and logistics, sterile plants, cold chain shipping, pharmacy convergence teams, DEA audits. None of that's cheap. And then, mega lawsuits. Remember Vioxx? One blockbuster settlement can wipe out an entire decade of margins. So, future products must soak up those losses. I'm not giving, big pharma a halo. There's a lot of profiteering we should crush. But if policymakers, they ignore these baked-in costs and simply slash prices by decree, they risk turning off the R&D tap that produces the next cancer breakthrough. So that's why at Triforta we champion transparency and aligned incentives over blunt force caps. Price controls, they treat the fever, but they rarely cure the infection.
Right, but the average equipment operator in Elko just sees insulin jump from $400 to $550 and thinks, there goes big pharma gouging me again, right? So can you unpack the math? Take that $550 a vial, and roughly what slice covers every year's of failed lab trials? What chunk offsets the next Vioxx-style lawsuit? And how much is pure profit?
Yeah. Picture you're fabricating, in the mining industry, fabricating a high-strength drill bit for a gold mine, maintenance crew. The sale price isn't just tungsten and carbide. It's months of prototypes that shattered on the test bench. The MSHA certifications, the freight to ship that to the mine sites, the marketing booth at the mining expo, and yes, the the liability reserve in case the bit snaps and someone loses a finger. So that's the true all-in cost. And prescription drugs really kind of follow the same principles. So, but with life and death stakes and a much, taller risk curve. So let us use, your example, the $550 insulin vial, as a back of the envelope example. So on that $550 vial, roughly $110 is true margin. About $140, keeps the factory lights on, and then another hefty $140 underwrites tomorrow's failed experiments. So you can debate whether 20% profit is righteous, but if lawmakers blindly carve the price down to, say, $150 without shrinking the risk stack, capital is going to dry up and the pipeline of new treatments stalls. So that's bad news for, every diabetic miner hauling 60-pound equipment in 100-degree heat. That's why Triforta pushes, transparent procurement and PBM reform over blunt caps. We attack the waste, the rebates, spread pricing, opaque middlemen, and you can shave, serious dollars while still funding the science that keeps the workforce healthy. And you can shave serious dollars while still funding the science that keeps our workforces healthy enough to clock in.
Okay, so first stop on the Fix-It tour, pharmacy benefit managers. You've called PBMs the black box of drug spending, and I've watched our mining clients stare at the so-called pass-through contracts only to see half their rebates disappear into the ether. For the CFO who's still fuzzy on what a PBM actually does, can you break down why these middlemen wield so much power and why reforming them is priority number one on your list?
Yeah. So let's think of a PBM as the toll booth operator standing between your employees and every pharmacy claim. They don't mind the ore, but they decide what every truck pays to cross the bridge. So the effective price you see on a remittance statement is whatever that PBM engineer programs into the toll box. So here's how we fix the game. Blow up rebates and spread pricing. Rebates are marketing kickbacks dressed up as discounts. The sticker price climbs so the PBM can brag about a fat rebate, skims its cut, and hand you whatever crumbs are left. Scrap that rebate shell game and demand the net price at the point of sale. So no hidden markups, no Monday morning true-ups. Your plan pays what the wholesaler charges, period. Sever PBMs from insurance carriers, so breaking them completely out, using independent pass-through PBMs. Right now, vertical integration lets the carrier double dip. They bill your premium on the front end, then pocket the margin again when the PBM they own adjudicates your scripts. It's the same monopoly logic that broke the Standard Oil or Ma Bell. Split the pharmacy, switch from the risk-bearing entity. Suddenly, the insurer's only incentive is to lower the claim cost because there's no drug spend gravy left to sip. Outlaw backdoor payments, full stop. Independent brokers like Triforta would be thrown in jail for rebating premiums under the table. If we gave a percentage of our revenue back to employers. Yet carriers usually route billions through PBM side pockets and ban every off-ledger admin fee, data fee, and network access fee. So when the last shadow dollar dries up, the conflict of interest evaporates with it. Hit those three targets, and just like that, insurers pivot from pharmacy arbitrage to genuine cost stewardship. And your mining company's RX trend flattens. Your stop-loss renewal shrinks. And your employees finally see a copay that feels human again and affordable.
Got it. So now let's tackle Fix-It number 2, global drug sourcing. So our Nevada plan sponsors always ask, if the exact same Humira pen costs a quarter as much in Vancouver, why can't we just FedEx it down and stick it in the fridge? What red tape, liability worries, or supply chain turf wars still block an employer from legally tapping those Canadian or UK price tags today?
Yeah, exactly. Regulations and a gauntlet of middlemen keep the border sealed, even when the medicine itself already crosses it, and it's crazy. Let me put some color on the roadblocks for our mining finance teams they run into when they ask, why can't we just import the $600 Canadian Humira instead of the $2,800 Reno version? So that very same pallet of Humira that left the plant in Dublin might get repackaged in Toronto for $600, yet becomes contraband if it crosses into Montana. So what fixes that logjam? So we have federal structured importation license. So we need to create a new class of FDA importers and call them RX Wholesalers International, who meet U.S. sterilization and cold chain standards. Florida passed such a law. They're just waiting for final FDA green lights, and nationalize that model. Then there's state safe harbor liability shield. So give plan sponsors and dispensing pharmacists the same federal tort shield that they have when domestic generics. If the product carries an FDA-recognized NDC, liability follows the manufacturer, not the employer. And then reciprocity pricing clause. So let CMS publish quarterly reference prices from peer nations. Any U.S. pharmacy may dispense at or below that benchmark without voiding rebates. So that turns a Canadian price into a negotiating weapon inside our own borders. Then there's transparent foreign mail-in order networks. The moment 1 through 3 go live, qualified vendors flood the market, just like Uber drivers flooded JFK once airports allowed app-based pickups. Employers could contract with a Canada-vetted specialty pharmacy and have Humira arrive in Elko under full chain of custody documentation. So the result is really true head-to-head competition. Domestic manufacturers either align prices or watch their shares evaporate. So our mining companies' specialty drug spend drops 50, 70%, and stop-loss renewals often flatten. And employers still get the exact same molecules or medications just without the U.S. price umbrella tax. And so that's why we rank global sourcing right next to PBM reform. We break the artificial border, and the market does the rest.
That import playbook you just sketched up will have every CFO in our audience fist pumping, but none of it takes flight unless DC pulls the trigger on PBM divestiture, right? Given today's political trench warfare, do you honestly see both parties lining up to break apart carrier-owned PBMs? Or are we staring at another Capitol Hill stalemate where good ideas die in a committee?
Yeah, well, it's actually surprisingly the stars are lining up for once. Not just because it's an election cycle, but here's why I think this fight punches through the partisan fog. There's red state, Main Street pressure, rural employers, cattle ranchers in Texas, miners in Nevada are screaming about $600 EpiPens. GOP incumbents can't shrug off constituents who bankroll their own health plan and feel the pain weekly. Then you got the blue state labor unions. Organized labor sees PBM spread pricing, siphoning dollars that could fund wage hikes. And progressive reps are hammering corporate middlemen in every town hall. So that's political oxygen that you don't waste. And then we have bipartisan antitrust revival. So the same lawmakers who grilled big tech last summer now wield the antitrust playbook. Carry-on PBMs look a lot like the self-preferencing practices that had Google and Apple in the hot seat. And then budget hawks and Medicare math. CBO recently signaled that dismantling vertical integration could trim $40+ billion from Part B over 10 years. Deficit hawks on both sides smell a pay for that doesn't raise taxes, a rare unicorn. Draft legislation with momentum. Congressman Carter, he's a Republican out of Georgia and a pharmacist, and Congressman Schakowsky, a Democrat of Illinois, they co-sponsored the PBM Transparency Act. And it has 40+ bipartisan co-sponsors and language that bans carrier ownership outright. That's not just theater. That's a live grenade on the House calendar. So will lobbyists try to water it down? Yeah, of course. But the coalition spans libertarian, free marketers, progressive populists, and every employer coalition from Silicon Valley to the Smoky Mountains. When you get that mix chanting the same refrain, break up the PBM chokehold, stalemate suddenly looks less likely. My bet, we see divestiture language tucked into a must-pass healthcare extender bill before the next presidential inauguration.
So we just talked about PBM divestiture, giving employers a lifeline, but many of our listeners live hours from a major metro. If their local critical access hospital can't keep the lights on, drug savings won't matter much. So given that Medicare and Medicaid keep ratcheting reimbursements down in real dollars, what's the real world fallout for those rural mining towns we serve? Are we talking reduced services or entire facilities going dark?
Yeah. Sadly, both. We're already watching the fuse burn. So here's the math that no one prints on the election flyers. Static government rates versus escalating costs. Medicare and Medicaid bump reimbursements about 1 to 3% a year, while labor, supplies, and utilities for rural facilities, they jump 8, 10, 12% every year. So that means every epidectomy they bill to CMS digs them deeper into the red. Then you have commercial cross subsidy. To stay solvent, hospitals shift that shortfall onto employer plans at 250 to 350% of Medicare reimbursement rates. So your Nevada Mine Health Trust ends up footing the bill through premium hikes, not because care improved, but because Uncle Sam underpaid. The service line collapse, when the margin finally hits zero, hospitals start amputating service lines. First maternity, then oncology, then imaging. We lose services in different parts of the state. Moms, because of maybe obstetrics being dropped, moms now have to drive 115 miles to Reno to deliver. And then you got the outright closure and ambulance poverty. So if losses persist, the board votes to shutter altogether. Ambulance rides get longer. Level 1 trauma response stretches past the golden hour. Employers watch workers' comp claims spike because the nearest ER is 2 counties over. And then there's a hidden tax on employers. Every rural closure feeds a vicious loop. Premiums climb to backfill new transport and out-of-network costs, squeezing the very businesses that prop up the local economy. It's a silent tax paid in payroll dollars, not line item levies. So bottom line, price caps on the government side don't actually shrink healthcare spend. They just reroute the invoice to private employers and ironically put the local hospital on life support. That's why we preach balanced reform. PBM transparency to drop drug costs and reimbursement models that reward rural facilities for keeping miners and their suppliers healthy instead of penalizing them for geography. Until we fix both ends of the pipe, Elko and Winnemucca and all the rural areas will keep watching, the services and ER lights flicker. So what's the road ahead look like, say, the next 6 to 18 months? The winners are going to be employers who negotiate early, bake importation language into their 2025 plan documents, and ditch rebate-centric PBM contracts. Employers whose $150 insulin copay drops to $15 when the plan's unit cost collapses. Taxpayers, because CMS will piggyback on employer pricing and shave billions off Part D. The losers, those are going to be the legacy carriers and PBMs whose balance sheets rely on opaque spread revenue. And the wholesalers that refuse to modernize logistics for international pedigree drugs. Anyone betting that healthcare inflation is inevitable. So my net take, the fog is lifting. Transparency and cross-border competition are finally punching holes in the old cost structure. For the first time in a decade, CFOs can plan on flat or even negative RX trend without slashing benefits. But you only win if you move early. So if you wait 18 months, and the easy savings will already be priced into the market.
All right, so for every CFO and HR director who downloaded our Triforta Better Benefits Playbook in last quarter and stuck it in a desk drawer, time to crack that thing open. Before their next renewal hits the inbox, what's in one playbook tactic they can execute immediately that won't require a 2-year feasibility study?
Yeah, so in our playbook, in section 2 of the playbook, there are three quick hit moves you can make this month to save big on medicine costs. Make a free lane copay. Pick one special way to get medicine, like using mail order or a certain pharmacy. Employees use that lane, they pay zero. If they go to any other store, they pay more. Most people will choose the free lane, and the plan spends less too. So order costly drugs from cheaper countries. Some pricey medicines like Humira, GLP-1 shots cost way less in Canada or the UK. We already have safe legal partners there. Swap your company name on the papers today, and the first shipment can arrive in about a month. So sign up for Drug Maker Help. Many drug companies will cover the bill for folks who qualify. That's called copay assistance. We check who fits, fill out the forms, and the employer's cost drops to zero. Your plan only pays the leftover small amount. So how fast and how much? All three steps can be up and running in about 30 to 45 days. So for a group of about 1,000 employees, you can save about $400 to $600 per person per year without raising deductibles or kicking anyone out of the network. Big insurers won't tell you this because they make money off the old way. But our playbook shows every step and gives you the right phone numbers. So open that PDF, flip to the section, and book a 15-minute chat with our benefits team, and you'll head into renewal talks already holding 6 figures worth of savings.
Love it. Page 12 is officially coming out of the drawer. I can promise you that, folks. So listeners, here's your homework. Open the playbook and dog ear section 2 tonight. Circle one quick strive lever, tier 0 copays, international sourcing, or manufacturing assistance. That feels like low-hanging fruit for your plan. And the third is ping our benefits engineering team for that 15-minute sandbox call. No slide deck, no consultant speak, just real numbers and a go-live checklist. And if you implement even one of these 3 moves before your next renewal, you've already turned this episode into measurable dollar savings. And as always, the playbook download link is in the show notes below.
Yeah, thanks, son. Change isn't on the horizon anymore. It's rolling down the haul road with their headlights blazing. So none of us can script every twist, but the vector is clear. Transparent pricing, border-busting competition, and plan designs that finally put members, your welders, your teachers, your accountants, your mining operators, at the center of the cost equation. So here's my final charge. Demand daylight from your PBM and insurance carrier. If a contract reads like hieroglyphics, it's hiding margin. Open the global pipeline now, not next budget cycle. Every month you wait, another 5-figure script hits your loss report. And deploy the playbook levers that we walk through. Tier 0 copays, structured import assistance programs, they're plug and play, and they work. So do that, and you'll watch premiums flatten, your reserves grow, and employees brag about zero-cost meds instead of groaning at the pharmacy counter. That's the win-win circle we wake up to build at Triforta every day. So thanks for lending us your ears and your spreadsheets today. Keep pushing, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next episode with fresh data and a bigger shovel. So take care, everyone.
Yeah, and that's a wrap. If today's playbook tactics sparked an idea or saved your health plan $1, do us a favor, hit the follow button, share this episode with a colleague or two, and drop your biggest takeaways in the comments. We love to hear those. If you need the full Triforta playbook or that 15-minute sandbox call, feel free. Links are waiting in the show notes below as well. And until next time, keep your costs down, your coverage strong, and your people healthier than ever. Talk to you soon.